Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar broadcast, our first webinar broadcast for 2019, titled Top 10 Cloud Security Considerations for 2019. I'm GP. I'll be one of your hosts and speakers. And with me, we have a distinguished speaker along with us, Elvis Moreland, who is a senior security professional and is at the University of Central Florida. So folks, stay tuned in. If you're looking to access the broadcast, the link is on your screens. You can also use the phone to dial in. In case you have any technical difficulties whatsoever, please feel free to call in the 877 number and the support line from GoToWebinar. And also the chat system is available to you for asking any questions. So feel free to go ahead and submit those, and one of our moderators will go ahead and read out those questions as they come in. So without much further ado, let's go ahead and get started. And Happy New Year to all of you, and welcome to this first webinar broadcast for 2019 from stackArmor. So as I briefly mentioned, we have you'll be in good hands today. We have Elvis Moreland, who is the Cybersecurity Program Director at the University of Central Florida within the Office of Research. He is one of our customers who's been obviously on the forefront driving security issues. I love talking to him. I love interacting with him. He has some really interesting points of view on the role of security, the role of security standards, and also cloud, and that's always very refreshing to have a discussion about. And I'm going to be your host and speaker today as well. I've done cloud migrations for the last 10 years, did my first one in 2009, have been working with AWS for almost 10 years now, and around the intersection of cloud security and compliance, and that'll be the topic for today. So for those of you that are very interested in IT modernization and transformation, we can all sort of see this happening around us. There is a tremendous amount of cloud adoption occurring in different organizations. So Forrester, for example, says almost 60% of North American enterprises now rely on public cloud platforms, and that number continues to grow. Certainly, if you've bought stock, you know that there is a lot of growth that's occurred in just, for example, AWS's revenue numbers. So we all know public cloud is being consumed, and of course Azure and others. Here is a projection from Gartner. So we believe that the public cloud market worldwide will exceed $200 billion this year. And so clearly, a lot of organizations are getting onto the public cloud bandwagon. Lots of systems and data being posted on these cloud platforms. And so that's leading to some really interesting challenges from a security and compliance standpoint. And so what's interesting is if you look at some of these industry reports, the first one is from McAfee. They publish an annual cloud security and risk report. And so if you look at the most recent one, it's a pretty interesting read. But one thing that caught my eye was the number of security misconfigurations that occur within a very common environment that somebody may be hosting. And so what's interesting is all of the cloud service providers do a pretty good job in providing all the different tools, guidance, help to go in and make sure people are able to operate securely. But still, these kind of misconfigurations happen, security incidents happen. And the way we sort of look at it from a stackArmor standpoint is there is just a tremendous amount of change. There is a tremendous amount of velocity. There is a tremendous amount of delivery at scale and at speed. And obviously, when things are moving so quickly, and certainly the cloud has set that expectation that things can be done quickly, sometimes the security, governance, compliance aspects do not keep pace. And so certainly there's a lot of room for improvement in that space. And what's also equally interesting is here a report from Gartner where they talk about how security mistakes are likely to be the cause of lack of understanding on the customer's part. The point being that cloud platforms have been at play for almost 10 years now. They're fairly robust and they are fairly mature, and they provide a lot of the tools that are required to stay secure. So really based on the shared responsibility model, it is really incumbent upon the customer to stay informed, to stay up to date and secure. So one of the things that you see here is, it's interesting. So there are a lot of cloud risk management tools, but a lot of those tools are A, either very expensive, or B, not what we call cloud native. They are risk management using a sort of more traditional or legacy framework where you secured it or accredited the system once, and then you came back only a year later or maybe 3 years later to revisit it. But in a world where there is DevOps, there's cloud, and there's constant change, it's critical to ensure that we are monitoring these environments more frequently than just once a year. The second thing is, it's very hard to keep track of operational work items, right? So what we find is a lot of customers are struggling to manage these environments in a reliable way. And so, the promise of cloud was pay as you go, and there would be better utilization. That's definitely true, but the tooling and the customer's ability to use that tooling effectively is still sort of work in progress. So lots of opportunity for improvement, lots of opportunity to realize the value of cloud and really deliver a secure environment. But as this sort of chart shows, it's still a work in progress. So I talked to you a little bit about cloud security is not well understood, and this is an incident that happened with us, with one of our customers, where we provided them with access to an Amazon account as an example. Unfortunately, in this particular case, the developer concerned basically did not go in and follow best practices, posted their access keys and secret keys on GitHub as an example. And so that just resulted in a lot of challenges. And so again, the ability to go in and monitor such activities is very critical. So luckily, from our standpoint, we were able to go in and monitor this. We have a scan that looks at these GitHub repositories and identifies if somebody's mistakenly posted such information. We immediately pull it off and disable the IAM credentials. But again, this goes to the point of the absolute need to go in and make sure continuous monitoring of these cloud environments is well established. So with a little bit of drum roll, here is our top 10 list of security issues that are to be worked on in 2019. And so we will go through some depth through the first 5, and then we'll break into the Q&A with Elvis Moreland from University of Central Florida. But if you're interested in the other 5 items towards the bottom, then please send us an email. We'll give you an email address and we'll send you our white paper on that. But just in terms of top of mind, I think you'll have an interesting conversation today about really selecting a strong and proven security standard. And there are lots of security standards in the market, PCI, HIPAA, HITRUST, CSF, and others. But I think one of the things that's sort of trending in industry right now is sort of this increasing area of regulatory compliance. And so it's very important to go in and select a standard that can stand legal scrutiny and has some kind of a backing from some entity that is fairly well recognized. So we think that security, privacy, and those kinds of issues are just going to take a different turn with just given the stakes involved. We believe the courts are going to get involved. Certainly the regulatory agencies, if you look at GDPR, if you look at 800-171 and the DFAR 7012 clause, the new and up and coming regulations from the state of California on privacy and security, it'll be very important for organizations to select a security standard that's proven. And we definitely feel that a NIST-based security standard and guidance is the way to go. But definitely, it does not mean one size fits all, but definitely selecting a security standard is absolutely critical that's legally proven and has some kind of a stature. The second thing is you should definitely go in and start looking at the concepts around security by design. Security by design, trustworthy computing, those are all pretty well-known principles, but as we get into sort of this area of cloud-based systems, it's very important to go in and revisit those principles because a lot of people feel, and you'll see common literature on that effect, to that effect, so people just feel that if they move their workload to the cloud, it somehow inherently is secure, which is certainly not the case. It's just that the enduring security and design best practices change. They're easier, but you still want to follow them. And so making sure that those concepts are baked into your system and your platform right from the beginning is absolutely critical. And we'll share with you some examples further on. Another interesting one, and this is a favorite one for this year, is we want CISOs to start thinking like developers. And so just like developers live and breathe microservices, APIs, platforms, code everything, we think CISOs should think in a similar way. And so they should stop looking at tools as a one-off, but think about building a security platform that allows them to have different kinds of tools to go in and pull in different kinds of data and have that data then be meshed together either through dashboards or APIs or automation to go in and do the job. And so there is essentially a new emerging sort of practice called DevSecOps that you'll be hearing a lot of. And basically DevSecOps, we'll talk about it in a bit, is really the integration of all of these security and compliance practices as part of the DevOps pipeline. So again, a key part is for CISOs to again start to have the talent and the skill to incorporate those capabilities into their different program. Strong monitoring and incident response is just absolutely critical. In a situation where the cloud environment can change and be modified by developers through things like DevOps, it's very important to make sure that you're able to go in and keep a tight leash on what's happening within the environment and react pretty quickly. There is a lot of new guidance, both on the HIPAA side, as well as some of the new NIST 800-171 based DFAR 7012 clauses, where incident response and reporting is a key part. And in fact, there are penalties if you're not able to go in and report in a timely manner. So therefore, having an incident response program along with the continuous monitoring program is absolutely critical. Another thing that you start to hear a lot about is this concept of a zero trust architecture. And what's interesting about zero trust architecture is in the first wave of cloud modernization, we basically translated existing concepts where, for example, if we established a DMZ and had a firewall, then all of the area inside behind the DMZ and behind the firewalls was considered trusted and safe. But as history has shown, all environments are liable for getting breached, and so it's absolutely important to protect the data inside and outside. So we'll talk to you a little bit about how it's important to go in and secure traffic both in motion and at rest at all parts of the architecture, whether inside the DMZ or not. Strong data management, number 6, and a strong data management and privacy program, absolutely critical. The whole move started a little bit with GDPR, and there is just more coming. The ability to go in and encrypt data at scale, the ability to go in and make sure that we are able to go in and ensure the protection of our customer data, of user data, even employee data is absolutely critical. Along with that, with a strong privacy program, you need to have things like you need to know where your data is, what kind of data it is, and so the ability to go in and have strong data inventory, data access management controls, and just a higher level of stewardship of the data within your enterprise is extremely important. And now it will increasingly become a requirement, especially in the US now with the new California Consumer Privacy Act coming into play and coming into force next year. So again, anybody who has California resident data will have to go in and sort of comply with that act. And so really, it's just a movement that's happening across the board. Conduct a tabletop exercise to simulate an security incident. So a lot of people that have worked in government-based systems, NIST-based systems, know this concept of what's called a tabletop exercise. And so really what you're doing there is you're trying to test your level of preparedness to be able to go in and respond to an incident. And what's interesting about this tabletop exercise is not the fact that you're just sort of having a bunch of IT people sort of get together, but it's a holistic response that includes the whole organization. For example, how are you going to communicate with your customers? How is your legal department going to go in and check on liability issues? Who is going to call up the insurance company and make sure that you are covered in terms of the practices that are required to be followed as part of your cybersecurity liability coverage? How are you going to go in and, of course, have a set of vendors who can help you go in and perhaps analyze? So all kinds of things are involved in this kind of a simulated security incident exercise, and it's amazing and what you learn when you go through this. So that's one of our top 7 recommendations this year, to go in and make sure you do run such an exercise. Finally, you also want to go in and develop a threat model. So what's interesting is, as a lot of organizations have seen, if you're in the healthcare space, or if you're in the utility space, or if you're in the, let's say, airport public sector space, then the kinds of threats that you're experiencing vary from industry, and it's very important to look at the cybersecurity threat model. So do an analysis of who are your users, what kind of endpoints are they using to enter your environment, what kind of attack vector they might go in and follow into your environment. So for example, if you have a lot of business users that are dialing in from all over the place, then having a strong VPN-based model, putting in strong endpoint management might be important. So again, make sure that you're able to go in and create a risk and threat model. And there are some really interesting ones. There's a new one that just got published by the Office of Director of National Intelligence called CTF, the Cybersecurity Threat Model Framework. So it's sort of interesting. I think there are bits and pieces of that that are relevant to everybody, and it's definitely worth a look. Start thinking about supply chain risk, number 9. That's huge. And so what's happening is, if you look at a lot of the cybersecurity breaches that have occurred recently, it's not necessarily the organization itself that got breached, but it was some third-party supplier. And so Department of Defense in particular has, for example, last year made it a priority, and the year before that made it a priority to look at supply chain risk. And as you're a large organization, or if you're going in and doing business with a number of partners, it's very important for you to take a look who you're doing business with, what kind of software you are buying, where is it originating from. Again, those kinds of questions can help make sure that you're starting to think about supply chain cyber risk in your environment. So for example, if you're using a lot of outside vendors that are accessing your environment, you may want to make sure you put in certain either contractual obligations, or you go in and put in some technological solutions, for example, using VDI, or asking them to use specific antivirus or malware protection. Again, you want to make sure that you're looking down not just at your own enterprise, but at the extended enterprise, which includes all of your supply chain partners. And finally, the least but not the last and but not least important is definitely go in and conduct regular vulnerability and penetration scans. Definitely go in and make sure you continuously benchmark your architecture against industry trends. A lot of cloud providers publish best practices, and it's important to go in and to continuously review your performance against those benchmarks. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is our top 10 list for 2019. And so we will go into some of these with a little bit more depth. And so the first one that we talked about a little bit was the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, or I should say the NIST Risk Management Framework, RMF. Again, lots of organizations think of it being very heavy. But the nice thing is you can tailor it. You can tailor it to whatever makes sense. The reason we like it is there is a wealth of information, there is a wealth of experience behind using it. And so we believe that this is a good starting point and a fairly complete framework that allows organizations to make the right journey and address holes in their cybersecurity and privacy architecture. The second thing we talked a little bit about was to adopt security by design principles. So here is an example of how we're advising our customers to start thinking about their cloud environments holistically and start planning for what we call platform-centric or landing zone-based architectures. So you want to go ahead and build in the principles of separation of duty. That means the production environments cannot be accessed by people that access the dev environments. The security environments are separate and segregated. The production environment, the users that are accessing the production environment cannot go in and, for example, access the security services environment. So you want to, again, go in and start implementing these best practices right from the beginning and make sure that these principles are incorporated in your design and architecture right from the beginning. So this is a very interesting blueprint that Amazon is definitely going in and recommending to its customers, and so are other cloud providers, with the ability to go in and have common shared services that include identity, access management, antivirus, things like that. So again, by planning for your architecture up front, I think it can help you pay rich dividends later on, so you don't avoid costly remediation. And if you're looking for some kind of certification later, you'll basically sail through that process. We talked a little, this is my favorite one, we talked a little bit about having the CISO start to think like a developer. And so really what we believe the right path from a security and risk management standpoint as far as cloud-based environments is concerned is to start thinking about security from code to cloud. And so really you want to make sure that you're covering things like code vulnerabilities through things like static code scans. And so again, as you can see, the breadth of issues that you need to deal with, starting from static code scans, dynamic code scans, start including things like vulnerability scanners, penetration scanning, monitoring the security policy configurations of cloud platforms. There's a broad set of things that needs to be done, and not to talk about standard things like antivirus, malware, etc. And as you can see, the list goes on and on. And so really there is really no one tool that does it all. And so therefore you want to think about the ability to go and build something like a cybersecurity data lake, which has the ability to go in and consume data from all kinds of different tools so that you're able to go in and get a holistic picture that will continue to grow as your organization grows. So again, you want to go in and select tools that offer APIs. You want to select tools that offer open interfaces. They don't lock you into just their dashboard. And so again, developers are really good at this, where they program to the API, they get JSON-based data as an example, and then they build interesting solutions out of it. And we think that a CISO should do the same. And this is an example of a solution that we have built for some of our customers called Threat Alert that epitomizes that sort of trend. Continuous monitoring is key. As I showed you a real example early on, the ability to go in and detect threats and react to them quickly is important. And of course, that doesn't happen by accident. You need to have things like risk scoring. You need to have the ability to quickly detect and respond. So you also need to be able to go in and, for example, there are lots of things happening in your environment. You need to be able to age those and again, go in and make sure you provide end-to-end coverage. And this is a scenario where we actually believe ITSM pays rich dividends. And so we really believe there is a marriage between DevOps and ITSM, and that's called DevSecOps, where you're now starting to take more mature incident management, continuous monitoring and response capabilities. And so some common indicators that must be monitored, we just gave them here as an example. If you're operating within the cloud environment, might be the number of IAM credentials that have privileged access, number of failed logins on your Active Directory, the number of public-facing security groups, unattached volumes. These are all different kinds of things that are happening in your environment that must be tracked. And again, the continuous monitoring and reporting of these is absolutely critical. So this is just a quick example of a dashboard system that we have developed for continuous monitoring and alerting, and it just shows you some of those metrics that I talked about. And what's interesting is, of course, as you're doing continuous monitoring, you've got these dashboards and you're getting this data, but it's also equally important to make sure that you're able to go in and institute good oversight and governance processes. So in other words, you should, for example, have a daily security scrum. You should review this information and go in and act upon it, right? So security is not an accident. So the ability to go in and complement this continuous monitoring and reporting with strong management and oversight is absolutely critical for success. And number 5, we talked a little bit about zero trust architectures. So really, in terms of coverage around zero trust architectures, the idea, like I said, is simple. We don't treat the environment behind the firewall any differently than we do without it. And so really there are 3 or 4 key principles. You want to go in and make sure your data is protected throughout its life cycle. So for example, when we build external facing websites, HTTPS, TLS-based certificates are some things that we use. It's pretty common. What's less common is to translate that and take it all the way back within my environment. So for example, the communication with the web server and the database server should ideally occur over an encrypted channel as well. Obviously, we want to go in and encrypt our storage. So archives, data on disk should be encrypted. But we also want to start looking at encryption of the data inside the database as well. There have been a number of cases where there have been just breaches and entire databases or files have been downloaded. So again, just hardening your environment, putting in those security controls is very important. Token-based identity management, this is becoming pretty popular. And so as I briefly alluded to earlier, privileged access management is absolutely important. And so a lot of times there are things like insider threat. So you want to go in and start managing that by basically just issuing role-based tokens that give access to certain users for a certain period of time, and then it's taken away. Again, a way to sort of go in and make sure that you're able to control more at a granular level the users that are accessing your environment. Also, control and access to the network and your applications is very important. There are some really interesting solutions like Zscaler as an example that we are working together with our customers on. And so again, traditionally we've always provided VPN-based access that provides network access, but solutions like Zscaler actually take that a step higher, and they just manage that connection and don't necessarily directly give access to the network, but actually manage application access at a higher level of abstraction. So again, sorts of interesting things, and again, you will definitely hear more about zero trust architectures in 2019 and beyond. So you want to start thinking about it, start experimenting with it, maybe do a POC or two, and start to go in and get engaged. So with that, I will go in and really talk a little bit about our guest speaker, Elvis Moreland from the University of Central Florida, and really enjoyed talking to him. We exchanged notes late at night, and it's just an absolute pleasure to have an opportunity to feature him on this broadcast. So Elvis, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, GP. Thanks for having me in. I really look forward to discussing with you about these 10 topics, because I think they're so vital for what we plan to do in the federal space going forward this year.
Thank you, Elvis. So why don't you start off by introducing yourself, give folks a little bit of a background of who you are, what is important to you, and what you're really passionate about.
Sure, absolutely. I started in information security before it really was part of the industry. So I started in the late 1980s with electronic security in the Air Force, and then my career has progressed and evolved to where I am today at that CISO level. What I do for UCF in terms of the research, the federal research that they have, is I'm guiding a whole research division on making changes, making cultural changes, as well as business process changes, not just the technical, because the business process has to support both, the delivery, the research delivery, as well as protection of that federal information. So my partnership and my knowledge of stackArmor has grown over the past year, and you are seen as a vital contributor to our capabilities in delivering both the research deliverables themselves as well as protecting that information. Okay. So that's a little bit about my background. Obviously, I come from Department of Defense. I'm very well trained. The government has spent a lot of money training me, and then commercially, I've gone out and before there was IT programs, in higher education or even cybersecurity programs, I've been part of that group of individuals who've kind of led the charge in educating ourselves, getting certified, getting very knowledgeable with as much as we can to help the industry grow from this point forward. Just give you a brief overview. Obviously, we needed to find a federally compliant environment to host our systems in the cloud, and it just made sense to do that because of the ability to track assets more easily, set up configurations. So when you use a cloud environment, obviously you gain the benefit of establishing a system or system of systems within a secure platform, but it is ultimately the responsibility for the organization to configure their systems and manage their systems on top of that platform in a secure manner. And that's something that is near and dear to both GP and myself, to make sure that if you look at in several of those topics for 2019, there is a ultimate responsibility that is laid upon the organization to follow good process, to have good governance, and that in itself will go a long way. It's kind of like the 80-20. 80% of the work that you do in following good governance, following good process, and security engineering will fix most, if not the vast majority of your security issues going forward. And then you just have to maintain it. As Dr. Ross says from NIST, build it securely and then maintain it. So those two things, if you can focus, if you can bring your philosophy to a level that's that simplistic, it's easier to manage. Build it securely and then maintain. Did we get feedback?
Lisa, I have a question. In general, what are the security standards you personally like to implement?
So I have been doing this for a very long time, and I've implemented several standards. I mean, going all the way back to ITIL and COVID. But I will say today, what we have available for us that is free of charge is the NIST standards, starting with 800-53, following up with guides like 800-39, and then 800-160. Those three are always going to be used in my portfolio going forward, because the vast amount of research that has been developed in creating those guides. Those three guides alone represent over 30 years of lessons learned. And quite honestly, you just can't beat it for a free set of guidance and standards.
That's fantastic. So do you recommend NIST standards for any of the industries, like financial services or healthcare, or is that applicable for every industry? I would like to understand a little more from you.
I believe that you can use what we call an overlay for several different industries. Now, obviously, the cybersecurity framework was developed as a common language for a multi-industry approach. But if you're looking at healthcare or banking and you want to translate lessons learned, it is easily done because the mapping and the crosswalks are already there. You can use NIST standards and 800-53 in a banking environment or financial environment. You can do the same for healthcare. Now, when it gets to medical devices, obviously that's going to change your approach a little bit. But in the normal computing space, NIST applies very well across any industry with a little effort. It's not perfect, but it does fit.
Thank you so much.
Elvis, this is GP. Sorry, I'm back. I had a little bit of a technical event here. My apologies.
No worries.
So, Elvis, thank you so much for walking us through it. So, Elvis, obviously, you're in my conversations with you. You're sort of on the cutting edge. You're always looking about things ahead, and you've already been looking seriously at the cloud and bringing it into sort of a strong governance framework. So as you look out the next couple of years, so what are the things that you're thinking about in terms of next generation security architectures, compliance architectures? Obviously, this is top of the mind, but as a professional, what are the kinds of solutions that you're constantly thinking about or researching or looking to incorporate as part of your architecture?
Good question, GP. There are two topics I think that's really driving my work as a practitioner right now. One, the move away from hybrid IT and cloud to a holistic cloud environment because of the regulatory issues that come into play. That is a topic that we're addressing now with the university. And second is a new cultural event that is just being produced. Now, I've practiced zero trust networking and zero trust architecture for over 30 years, but in today's business world, in today's business environment, that was never the case. We'd always, you've probably seen this, the M&M defense. You have a hard outer shell and a soft inside. That is going away. So those two things, looking at a holistic cloud approach, as well as adopting a zero trust technology or architecture, is really driving what we're doing today. And I think it will help us in the long run in terms of managing security breaches that do not become data breaches.
That's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that, Elvis. Now let's switch topics a little bit and talk a little bit about, how do you go in and do management and drive change, right? So obviously, security is, as you mentioned, not new. We've known this all along, but I think what's changed is a couple of things. One, the stakes are much higher. Number two, it's much easier to get access to IT, resources. And so how do you sort of, as a security leader, help sort of drive change in thinking? A lot of customers that we talk to, they talk about obviously having a security function, but a lot of times the business or program owners or developers or other parts of the organization that have very strong business or programmatic needs, things like delivering stuff quickly or getting a product out to market or meeting a certain deadline. How do you deal with things like change in the context of management, where you keep driving home the fact that security is important, and how do you sort of change that mindset where security is not necessarily as top of mind and is sometimes seen as a pain in the neck, if you will, more than anything else? I'm just curious, what are your sort of tips of the trade?
Well, what I would recommend in this case, GP, is looking at it from a bimodal perspective. What we're doing with stackArmor is we're developing an environment that's going to adopt the right governance, the right processes, and the right technology. So people, process, and technology. And on the other side is a legacy environment that will be hard to change, both technically as well as culturally. So when you address these issues going forward, if you use a bimodal approach, eventually that more secure environment will win out. It won't be overnight, but you'll be able to follow both paths, still support the business side of the house, but eventually give yourself enough time to educate, to change minds and win hearts about security and what it means to the business, which is a a high return on investment.
That's very well said. So basically what you're saying is continue to invest in the new and more secure technologies,
Yes.
while the legacy infrastructure sort of gets retired or is phased out. Or that's interesting. That makes a lot of sense. Elvis, you obviously are great to always talk to and ping ideas by. So one question for you. One of the things we are seeing is this move away a little bit from infrastructure as a service to platform as a service, meaning cloud providers are providing these interesting services like serverless. So there isn't really any hardware involved. So for example, take RDS as a case in point. There is no patching. There is no ability to go in and get an endpoint and run your vulnerability scanner, right? It's all managed by the cloud provider, and realistically, all you get is essentially an API-based endpoint. So how do you think about security in a world which is so dramatically different from what we've been taught in the last 20, 30 years, where you have to do patching and all of that management, but suddenly patching is gone, right? So how do you sort of see this shift into containers and serverless on these cloud platforms, and what will be sort of the new security vectors that we have to worry about?
I think it's a very good topic, GP. In our legacy environments, we're dealing with assets, configurable assets. So we had an asset-based type of security approach. And when you talk about emerging, technologies, emerging architecture, then you're worried more about data-based security. How do you enable, access to that data? It's not so much the infrastructure anymore. So our challenges are both technical as well as cultural. How many executives do you and I know who are used to having, full administrative rights on their desktops or their laptops? That still exists today. And that's, subject to whale phishing and so forth. So those vulnerabilities still exist. But when we move into a data-based security environment, then we control that infrastructure security in a different manner, and then we're worried just about the data itself. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, how do we manage that cultural change from the legacy environment, which is asset-based security, and then move into a data-based security and culture? That's going to take time. Now, from my perspective, it's already there, and I'm sure you see it. But what kind of tools would you recommend that your customers would look at in terms of adopting that data-based security?
I think, Elvis, that's exactly one reason I just love talking to you. You put it out in such clear and succinct terms. Absolutely agree with you. We're moving from a asset-based security model where, we are, as IT professionals, we're just so focused on the widgets, the network, the firewalls, the routers, the physical assets or virtual assets for that matter, that we control and manage. And a lot of times, the security or the infrastructure teams in particular, they miss sometimes the most important part, which is data. So that's exactly right. So what we're focused on a lot, and it's not just us, I think we see sort of the regulatory framework driving towards it as well, is really, I think, one of the hardest, or you can also say most exciting parts, is sort of this notion of driving towards a policy-based security architecture. A lot of these cloud systems are all, have got sort of infrastructure as code, security as code paradigms, and that the ability to go in and, for example, we have a customer, they have a CONUS policy, so data cannot leave the United States. But when, for example, you go in and spin up an account within AWS, then technically, yes, you can dictate where the data goes by putting into a specific region. And so, but that same console allows you access to all of the other regions So the ability to, for example, go in and write a policy on that IAM access, a secure organizational security policy that says, okay, for this organization, you cannot go in and host any data or spin up any instances in a non-US region, is just a very simple example of that. So again, what we are seeing is this, policy-driven security architecture where you go in and sort of say a priori, I'm not going to let data here or there, constantly focusing on encryption. Encryption is a big deal, key management, things like that. Also, one of the big things that we see is just the absolute need for continuous monitoring. I think a lot of people, all of us are bad at some of the strong operational skills, but I think, there's just no getting away from it. You want to always know who is accessing your data. Do you have the right level of access privileges? Are you taking them away when they are not required? How many people have the ability to go in and, for example, access data that they shouldn't? So it all comes down to data access management, monitoring. That whole sort of data-centric view is exactly what we see and recommend to our customers. So that's a great observation on your part. So folks, we are getting close to the end of this session, and it's been a fascinating conversation with Elvis Moreland from the University of Central Florida. Elvis, as we wind up, any final parting thoughts of wisdom you would like to share with our audience?
I'd have to say there are two items that I would recommend any organization consider. When you're looking at moving to modern IT and modern security, you really need to adapt and look at changing your governance and your standards, as well as looking toward finding the right partner to help you get there. Like stackArmor is the right partner for us that got us into the cloud environment and the FedRAMP's authorized environment. So those two things, looking internally and looking externally. So both at your governance and at your solutions and where you need to go in the next 3 to 5 years.
I think, Elvis, that's really well said. I totally concur with you wholeheartedly. I think as we look at sort of architecturally speaking, public cloud computing in particular represents a massive wave of, really IT infrastructure outsourcing. And so therefore, as a customer or as a consumer, having a really, really strong governance, oversight, and monitoring model is absolutely critical. You always want to know what are your, what's your data, who is accessing it, and so that's so refreshing to hear from somebody. So Elvis, again, can't thank you enough. Thank you for being part of this broadcast. Folks, as we wind up and head to the close, next slide, please. Just to give you a little bit of information about stackArmor. So we are a solutions provider focused on compliance and security-based industries, and basically help organizations migrate to Amazon, including Amazon GovCloud. And so we've done a fair amount of work in the area of helping customers implement strong governance, oversight, and continuous monitoring programs. So if you're interested in the full report on the top 10 security tips that we have, or are interested in a solution that we have developed for compliance-focused markets called stackArmor Threat Alert, please do give us a shout, and we would be happy to go in and do a demo for you. This is especially important if you're an organization in either the healthcare space, the education space, or public sector space. So with that, that's, I think, the end of our prepared remarks and comments. For a quick shout out to the moderators, do we have any questions from the Q&A sessions?
No, GP, we are good.
Okay, great. So Elvis, again, thank you so much for being part of this